Welcome to ASU Care. You're here for the Bridge Initiative's behind the curtain preview of our upcoming productions. Next week we open on Friday with the performance of A Feminine Ending, and Just Be will be on Sunday. We have the director and writer of Just Be, Maybe Stewart, and the director of A Feminine Ending, Daniela Crispo, as well as Billy Russo, who is the original New York producer of A Feminine Ending, 2007, something like that? Wow. Yeah, so we're gonna actually launch off this evening with a demonstration of Maybe Stewart's play that's been recorded from one of their rehearsals, I don't know, a couple weeks ago. So it will probably have evolved by next Sunday. But this will give you a taste of what that's like, and then we'll launch into some conversation. We are recording this to broadcast, so thank you all for being here present. You will have some opportunity to engage, ask questions, and thank you all who are joining us virtually as well. So,
it is my unpopular opinion that the world would be a better place if everyone had to find themselves.
And I can hear the whispers from the crowd saying, we all have to do that already, so allow us to extrapolate.
The world would be a better place if everyone was born into a genderless society.
A world where instead of pink bows
and blue onesies and
parties celebrating all of expectations,
you have already parted to a feast.
We said, welcome, little one. Let's figure this out together.
A world where instead of insulting every infant, child, and adult with
Hypersexualized, clearly defined.
binary marketing
For manly men.
And fragile things.
or even underarm deodorant to split between starkly opposed gender norms, and if you fall somewhere between,
You best shut up.
and pick the one that won't get you
Side-eyed,
or
yelled
yelled
at,
or literally left for dead.
And we let them be a human first.
A world where instead of indoctrinating them with what is or is not proper, because of what is in their pants or in their hearts, we let them live and love and question what it means
To be human.
to be king,
to be heard.
to be man.
To be one.
to be who they are. A world where instead of telling your parents they get their
Just going through a phase.
or you're asexual or aromantic because they
Just haven't found the one.
or your bisexual child
Just
that you
making
get
it up for attention.
or your gay kid that you
Still love
them,
them,
but
you think
their love is a sin.
or your heterosexual cis kid that you
Raise them right. And we said, great job, kiddo. You figured it out.
the world wants to just remember it. Someday you learn something new that doesn't fit your label. It doesn't change who you are right now. And it's
It's okay to keep learning new things about yourself.
the world where instead of saying things at birth that first sat on the child, your hopes and dreams that never came true, and shaming them if they discovered it doesn't fit.
We let names grow as people do, adding a new syllable each time.
Find another piece of themselves.
Celebrate who they are.
Who they are becoming.
A world where instead of labels, does not fit inside what I choose.
Very small process. We welcome each other as people.
Maybe this opinion is crazy.
Maybe.
It doesn't make any sense.
Maybe.
It's a third reaction.
Maybe.
Like treating us as time to cool off.
Maybe I'm just bitter. Not everyone had to other themselves by questioning the core of their humanhood.
Like we did.
But how can I be wrong? Whatever queer individual I've ever met has been more human,
We're vulnerable.
More authentic.
More accepting.
more loving, more at peace with themselves, having to find themselves their own way.
A little more soul searching.
A little more authentic love.
A little more humanity. Could we all
all
use
use
a
a
little
little
more
more
of
of
us?
when we're at the TCA next week, everybody's been tested, doing lots of COVID testing, And there will be no masks, so you will not have trouble hearing people next week. But turning it over to Billy.
It's wonderful to see a rehearsal room, especially when you're working on a new play and you see something, it is magical, it's confusing, it's troubling, it's cathartic, it's spellbinding and mind-boggling, all at the same time. And there's something that is so unique in finding the new when you're creating a piece of work, whether that is a brand new work, a work that's new to the region. And what we have here is two of these artists who are right in the middle of that furnace, making that work to bring to you. And I just want to ask, maybe just tell us a little bit about your process, especially we can see something that's very collaborative, and how do you take it from a very solitary point of writing into this collaborative world?
Yeah, so this play is very strange for me in a way. It's based a lot on my life and kind of the narrative of how I came out as non-binary and all of that. So when I originally wrote it, a lot of it was me on stage presenting that story. But over the last 2 years, as we've been developing it with the bridge, it just became really obvious that we don't need another story about a white queer person. We need a story about all different shades and types of non-binariness and queerness in general. So a large part of this process was bringing that largely collaborative element in, which most of my plays are very collaborative in nature, but this one started much more isolated, and this process has kind of divulged from that greatly. So I now only have 2 lines in the show, where before I had most of the script. And we've split it up between my 6 ensemble members who play kind of the different elements of me, and figuring out what those elements were and how they can be presented was a huge part of this process.
Right.
Well, we started with this play with Bridge, maybe pitched this to me, 3 years ago now?
Yeah.
And so we had hoped to develop it because, as they said, their process is very collaborative. They need people in the room. And then COVID hit. And so I said to Maybe, is there anything we can do in COVID times? So we actually did, Maybe does obviously have words, a text, so Maybe wrote something, and we did a reading on Zoom. But there's only so much you can do with a play like this before you get in the rehearsal room.
Right.
But, I think it would be good just to take a step back, and I want to ask Daniela, and maybe, how do you define what is a new work? Because it could be a lot of different things. It could be something that's first never seen before, something that's seen before but seen by a new audience, something that people come to with no knowledge. What do you think, Daniela?
Well, I honestly think that you said it best. I think it's very subjective. I think new can be a brand new, freshly written first draft, or it could just be new to the region, new to the director, new to the audience. So I actually think it's quite open, and that's really how I define it. It's sort of, it depends on the piece.
Yeah, and that's what brought me here when Brenda told me about this talk. Was I was at Playwrights Horizons in New York City, and we did A Feminine Ending in its first production in 2007. And I think even though that's 14 years ago, it was late in 2007, doesn't make it not a new play here. And it's that kind of play that is, certain plays are kitchen sink realism. You don't have as much, you can get nuances out of performances, but Feminine Ending, the world is open for you to kind of explore how you want to tell that story. Is that correct?
Billy, would you actually mind, there's some people here who may not be as familiar with what those different kinds of terminology, so could you tell us what kitchen sink drama might mean? Like a sitcom or something? Is that what you?
No, it's ultra realism.
Okay.
It's a raisin in the sun. It is, we all think of The Glass Menagerie as kitchen sink drama, but it was not written as such. That play morphed into something that we think of as very homespun and but it's not. It's a memory play. So, but it's the plays that are anchored in that kind of realism. Joe, Look Back in Anger, I think, was the first one that was called kitchen sink drama.
Okay.
I forgot your question.
No, just how a feminine ending is very open to how you tell the story, but it's a play that's been published, so the script is set, whereas maybe script is still evolving, but this is done, but it's still you're approaching it as something new to you and the audience?
Yes, actually, well, I picked it up at from Drama Bookshop in New York back in, I think, maybe 2011. And when I first read it, I had an organic reaction to it, and I fell in love with it. But then I put it on the bookshelf thinking, well, hopefully one day I can direct it. And then Brenda and I were talking about our next full production, and I pitched it to her, and that was about 3 years ago.
And 4 or 5, it feels like.
I
It was a
know,
while.
and I reread it, and at the time where I was in my life and where our society was, I saw a whole different angle, and then through COVID, we had to postpone it, and here we are, and I have another version of it. So I think it really depends on who's reading it and what's happening in their life and in the world, and you just keep seeing more and more layers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like the whole COVID thing is also so unique when you're creating something new and you're relying on everybody as a collaborator, and then something happens and you lose one of them for 10 to 14 days because of the world we live in, and that must be extremely disruptive. Have either of you experienced that recently?
Ask us how many times you've experienced that. I think on a daily basis, right?
At this point, yeah. I'm actually one of the COVID compliance officers for the Phoenix Theater Company. So I've been helping us establish all of our COVID safety protocols and do our best to keep everyone safe in this process. But even my cast now has a couple of positives, and we're having to deal with that. We actually just brought on a new swing right before this, who starts tomorrow on a new track and will likely be performing for someone.
Wow. The people in the audience, like when you hear the word new play or new work, what are some of the things that like spring to your mind from that? You're like, ew, stay away from it, or it's untried, or it's exciting? Yeah?
Exciting, I heard.
I've been a subscriber to the Phoenix Theater for at least 25, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the best thing that I look forward to is when they have their festival.
Oh, okay.
And that's coming up, I think, in February.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just thrilling to see the ideas on the stage. And in their case, a lot of times the productions aren't even productions, it's a read, basically. But other times they'll kind of have a hybrid. But whenever I see anything new, especially when it's locally produced, I'll try and support it as best I can.
Just for the people that'll be hearing this on the recording, we had a gentleman in the audience who commented that there's a new work festival at Phoenix Theater that gets produced every year, and it's one of the things he looks forward to the most, especially supporting local productions, because it's just something new and that you've never seen before.
It's interesting too, the differentiation between workshop, reading, or production. It's like, what does that mean? Now, Daniela, you're doing a production of Feminine Ending, right?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit like how you see that as a differentiation between.
Well, it is, I think, usually an established play, a published play, and you have your crew and everybody your family is just huge. You have a whole design team, production stage managers, assistants, lighting designers. Everybody works together in different rooms in different ways to bring this entire world to the stage, and every component adds to the story. The lights tell their story, the music, I mean, hopefully it's all sort of the same story, but it's all interwoven. So it's not just the words and the actors, it's just everybody comes together and weaves this beautiful story. It's pretty massive.
Right. And tell us, like, from your point of view, what the workshop experience is.
Yeah, so this one's different than most workshops for me. Typically, when you have a workshop, you might have a little bit of blocking, which is movement on the stage. And all of the other elements are kind of stripped away so you can focus just on the text. For me, I've done a lot of work with the text on this play, and the most important thing I needed from this workshop was to just see it on its feet. So we're calling it a produced workshop. So we'll have some simple lighting, some simple props, and a couple of elements of the show will be fully blocked like they would, similarly to what they would be in a full production. Others are kind of park and bark, which is where we have someone just standing and delivering a monologue. And depending on how this week goes, we'll see if we have book in hand or if we're off book.
Right.
Off book was the goal, but with COVID, we have no idea what's going to happen.
It's funny, so I worked at this place in New York City called Playwrights Horizons, which was, their mission was solely to produce new American plays. And when I started there in 2000. And that new was very literal, means it had to be the first production. And there was a growing kind of unease amongst the industry that it was called premiere-itis, that theaters only would produce plays if they had the world premiere. So these plays were getting produced at lots of smaller theaters, and then the bigger theaters were like, we can't touch that, that's been done before. And it was fueled by a lot of the funders. Funders said, we're only going to fund new premiere plays. And there was like a while, and it took some kind of concerted effort to go back and say, that's not right, because the second production is almost more important than the first. Meaning that the second production gets a chance to learn from what the first did. When you're in a rehearsal and you've got a tech rehearse period and your first performance, there's times where you don't have it right, but you got to go with it. You got to make a decision and go. And that second and third production, which means like, so if I did it in New York and it was done by the Bridge 2 years later, it's not our production. It's reinvented from scratch, new creative team, people getting in a room and saying, what is this story about? And I think that that's so important. And that's what you're getting with A Feminine Ending, is a play that, yes, it has been done before, but this is new, and it's new to here, and it's new to 2021 instead of 2007. So I think that that's a good point to think about when you approach the work.
Well, and anytime what Daniela mentioned in terms of like all the different elements coming together, all the time and effort, she came to me, I forget, it was like a year and a half ago, or maybe about a year ago, and you said, is this still the play that we want to do? Because we had been supposed to be doing this in the fall, gosh, I lost track, fall of 2020, I think. And then, of course, COVID happened in March of 2020, and a lot of Danielle's team actually had already been in place. But, obviously, we couldn't do it in 2020, and then when we finally got a new slot we thought, oh gosh, COVID will be over. January 2022, that's perfect. Well, okay, here we are. But she came to me and she said, is this still the play, right? Because COVID, fundamentally, altered so many of us in so many ways, right? And I said to her, I was sitting with it, and, Will and I have talked about this. It's like, why this play? And I think this play is about somebody deciding, what's important in your life, what you're going to spend time on. And it's kind of a cautionary tale from one end of a person going I spent maybe time on the wrong things, or I'm regretting, and another person looking forward and going I'm not sure where I'm supposed to spend my time, but it's those decisions. And I think that for a lot of us, this COVID period has been about coming to terms with, where am I putting my time and my energy, right? Asking those questions and what's important. So I said to Daniela, I was I think this still feels really relevant in a maybe different way than it did in 2007.
Right. Mm-hmm. Do you think now is a good time for us maybe to just see a piece of that?
I would love that, yeah.
Yeah.
So we actually have two of our understudy casts. So this is a brand new thing for Bridge. We cast a full understudy cast to learn the play because we're in COVID times. So of course that added the expense, that added the labor on Daniela's part. It's a probably new experience for the understudies. I don't know, have you guys ever understudied before? No, have you in Hamlet? No. Well, anyway, so we've got Hamlet Lemus and Michelle Harrow here. Am I pronouncing that right? Michelle Harrow. And they're going to do a scene from A Feminine Ending for you.
God, I didn't know I remembered that play that well. It brought it all back. That was beautifully done. I remember that in the original production that we did, the set was a little bit. It was in our new smaller theater, where the smaller theater in Playwrights Horizons used to be this little black box theater that was in the middle of the administrative office. Truly, like, we had to hold the curtain before the show started because we had to get the audience in, and then the cast could go pee because they shared the bathrooms. And so we would have to, I remember once telling Lily Tomlin, you have to sit down because the cast member needs to pee. But we built this new 6-story building, and we now had this theater that took the place, which had its own floor. It had a huge, really incredibly big stage, but we still wanted to keep the plays intimate and to have them not be overwhelmed by set or too much production so that you really heard the words. And we were not saying that this wasn't a lesser play, stage 2, second stage. It was just different, a different aesthetic. And this play had, as the backdrop, was see the baby grand there? It was the inside of the baby grand turned on its side. So the back of the wall was that with all the wires and it was all of that tension within the play. And when you did that scene, I remembered that so vividly. So thank you for that. It was really beautiful.
I'd love to hear, you mentioned Marcia Mason and Blair Brown working on that play. What were your memories of working with them?
What I remember is, God, it was a kind of tense time because we had just produced Grey Gardens and the season before, and it was almost transferring to Broadway, and then it wasn't, and then it was back on. And
yeah, so for those who don't know, Grey Gardens was a huge musical.
Yeah.
And you said it like the set almost broke the stage. And like
every night I would be like break out in cold. If I listen to the cast album now, there's a music cue, and I hear it, and I start to sweat, my hands itch, and I'm like, oh no, because I remember the set going.
So that was a financial stress, is what you're saying at that time, right?
It moved to Broadway, like it won Best Actress, Tony, Supporting Actress, Costumes. But this play happened in the middle of all that. What I remember is Blair Brown, who directed it, and Marcia Mason, who played the mom, were the kindest, gentlest women who understood what was going on, but still made it sure that what they needed was heard and taken care of. And I remember thinking, I need to be more like them. Mm-hmm. That's my memory of A Feminine Ending, was that energy coming from them was just that kind of idea of the feminine not being weak, but also being nurturing to get what they want.
Mm-hmm. Have you found that with your actors, Daniela?
That they're wonderful?
Yes, I was going to say, not that any of them are in the room or anything.
No pressure. No, actually, I am so fortunate. I'm really not just saying that. They're just all just collaborative and supportive. And I personally, I try my best I love to work collaboratively. I want their opinion. I want to hear what they think. I want to hear what they feel like a moment. Try it. How does it feel? If you don't like it, let's try something else. I mean, that's what I love so much about this work, really, is working with all these different people. And these actors, these artists are just really beautiful people. They're kind to each other, and we have a good time. So we're working hard, but we're having fun. And I hope, 3 of them are here, so I don't know.
Well, and I haven't had a chance to talk to you about this, but like, you have an understudy cast and a like principal cast who are intended to perform. Mm-hmm. Have you kind of given them, like, you have to do it the same way as this other, or are they kind of having their own interpretations? Because I know in commercial theater, sometimes what happens is you're put into somebody's role and it's like you have to do like down to the gesture, down to the timing, to like you have to become like a puppet, a robot of what that other actor did. So I'm just curious what your process has been for that.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever had to do this. So what I've tried to be mindful of is making sure that if the understudy cast, anyone has to go on, or let's just say the whole understudy cast has to go on, we still have the same play. So I tried to focus on the vision, the intention, the beats, the moments. And of course, each actor has their own energy. And I've tried to create space for each person's individual energy and personality while still sticking to the ultimate goal, the scene, the intent. And I hope that came through, but that's what I stayed focused on, is making sure we had the same play, no matter who was on, but still, obviously, individual.
And that's an enormous undertaking to do, because normally, especially if a play is new, and you're still exploring and discovering it, we never had understudies. For this run of this play at Playwrights Horizons, we didn't have any understudies.
Oh, wow.
And the reason wasn't just that we didn't want them, it was we had a 4-week run and a 3.5-week rehearsal period. We would never have had the time to rehearse them. So we thought, well, we always rolled the die and said, you know, if something happens, we'll have to cancel. But to have, and I, like, at this, from seeing what these two did, I don't want to even call them understudies. It's like it's the cast too, because where they are, that's really impressive, I think.
Yeah, and so Billy, with that, did you ever get into a situation at Playwrights where you did not have understudies and you had to go to a plan B?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Luckily, it never wound up having to be me to go on. But I do remember we were doing this play. It was by Chris Durang. It's called Miss Witherspoon, and it was around Thanksgiving. And one of the actresses in there, she came and confided with me that her great aunt, who really raised her, was in failing health. And she said, if something happens, I'm going to have to go. And so I said, okay. So I called up this actress who had worked on the show right before us, could not have been further from her physical type. The woman was in her like mid to late 50s, big woman, and this woman was about 22 and thin. But I said, just on the off chance, are you staying around town? She said, yes. I said, okay, this is the situation. If she's ready, she has to go, would you go on? She said, great, yes. So I sent the script to her, and 3 days later, I got the call. And it was the day after Thanksgiving.
Wow.
And I called her up. Her name was Mel. I said, Mel, where are you? She goes, I'm in the butcher shop. I'm buying some sausages. I said, put the sausages down. I need you. And she arrived at the theater, and my heart sank, because she was holding the envelope that I sent with the script that I had sent her. It was still sealed. So I was like, oh my God, you hadn't read it yet, have you? She had seen it. And like, honestly, there was no one there because it was Thanksgiving. So I took her up into the costume storage place. I pulled out some stuff and said, try this on. And then she went on. She went on, book in hand, and I've never had an experience where I've had to make a curtain speech and say to the audience, this is not exactly what you're expecting to see, but, and like, just give it some context. And I've never had a situation where it hasn't been a great experience, and also that everybody in the audience wasn't kind of happy to have experienced that. But that was great. She played, Miss Witherspoon was about this woman who kept killing herself, and she was sent up to what she thought was her heaven, but it was like a Hindu spirit guide who would send her back down to earth to learn from it, and she just kept killing herself and kept going back down. And so this character was like a black Southern church lady with a big hat, but she was Jesus Christ. So.
I love theater. Maybe how does that sound in terms of our, like, understudies and crazy?
I mean, we'll see.
Yeah.
'Cause COVID times.
Yeah.
Like, it's just over at Phoenix Theater. Like, we've had so many understudies that have come in the day before to learn the show that night to go on the next day, just because it's so crazy right now, and we never know what's going to happen.
I do, but I think you're right, Billy. Like, I think there's something about being in the audience for that and witnessing that, and you realize, like, nobody else is going to have the same experience of this play that I just had, and so I think people love it. And I've been hearing about Broadway right now, and there's like so many understudies. They're literally calling people like who haven't done the show for 5 years and saying, like, do you maybe remember it, because we ran out of understudies, so could you come? I mean, it's crazy right now.
Yeah, there was a story. There was the musical Come From Away, and they actually had a cast on stage who had never performed. No one had performed with each other before, ever. They were all, they had been in the same, but they'd never performed together, any one of them. It is incredible, but the whole idea of understudies and swings, they are incredible artists to be able to step into any track at any moment. And it's an unnerving thing, but it's a skill. And the thing is, some people get very, very good
I was
at
gonna
it.
say, and they're very valuable. I've
Yeah.
heard that some people in New York, like, that's all they do, because people are like, I need you more as this thing swing and understudy than I need you as the person who goes on every night, because it's harder to find them.
Yeah, and then you have there are people who, for whatever life choices they make, who that's the career that they've made up. There's one woman, she was Bernadette Peters, Christine Ebersol, Donna Murphy. She was their standby. And they allowed her to raise kids and do what she wanted to live in New York. It was like a choice. But hard one. Can I tell you a little secret?
Please.
When I was driving up here, I Googled, and I was looking up Daniela, and I was like, oh my goodness, we overlapped at NYU for 1 year in 19...
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So I went to Stella Adler. Where did you go?
Lee Strasberg Theater Institute. They're your rivals.
Stella Adler and Lee Strasberg were arch enemies. They both studied with Stanislavski and came away with a different understanding of what he said. When Lee Strasberg died, Stella Adler said, thank God, now we can get on with the business of acting.
And I actually remember hearing that from friends in college, because we used to sort of tease each other, get in the same room and make fun of who went to which studio at NYU, and yeah, that's like a blast from the past.
I found that more than a couple of times here in Arizona. I moved here about 5 years, Rich? 5 years ago? Yeah. But there's a whole community of artists who are working here in this town. And in this town, it's like the Phoenix and Tucson, that it's like an extraordinary wealth of talent. And also just the people who are homegrown here. And I think you're very lucky to have that kind of pool of actors who also want to bring this kind of work to you, and not just, the pajama game is very sweet, but there's only so many times you can see it. But I think that it's, and I love that Brenda has found a way to bring them together to give you something more to chew on.
Yeah, it's an experiment this year, right? Like, this is, we've only done one other full production as the Bridge Initiative, and that one was a co-production with the venue, Tempe Center for the Arts. And so this time we're renting, and I thought, I want to maximize my investment, right? Because we're paying for the space for 2 weeks. And, we could try and run a feminine ending every single night, but I just didn't think we'd have the audience for that. So I thought, and we had been developing this piece, so I thought this might be a perfect opportunity to some of the nights, to alternate it so that we could have a chance to not only have this full production, but also have this brand new work. And I mean, I think it's been really interesting, and I think these two plays about this question of identity, this question of gender, what it feels like to be moving through the world, I think they kind of speak to each other a little bit too. So it's COVID times, but it's fun. We'd love to open up to questions from the audience if anybody has any questions about the process of new plays, about our two plays. Have any questions for anybody up on the panel? We're all ears.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
So kind of like to echo earlier from earlier in the discussion of the definition of what a new play is for all of you. Did any of you find yourselves, maybe not now, but in the beginning of your careers, where you wanted to be the first to have that play, the very first one to produce it, or are you happy to kind of take whatever inspires you?
So just to repeat the question, in terms of our careers, have we been happy to, or have we been wanting to be always the first one to start something, to start a new play, or if we're interested in being the second or third to interpret it?
I could say, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I've had that situation before where, and the answer is you really listen to what the artist needs. If you're talking about it from a producer standpoint, and when an artist says, I really need to go, not be in New York, and I need to do that in California, or I need this period to work on that. When you listen to that, it's easy to say yes. Otherwise, you find yourself being territorial. I don't know. I try not to be, but I think that sometimes you're like, no, this is ours, and we wanted to launch this. But sometimes, if you just stand back, and I learned this from the artistic director at New York Theater Workshop, and he said, don't tell the artist what you have for them. Ask them what they need.
Yeah, I went to a workshop about new plays, and they said they think of it as being a midwife. So it's like, oftentimes people come in and they think like, I'm gonna create this new, and it's like, no, you have to stand by and let that person bring their play into the world, as opposed to thinking it's yours. And I loved that image. Maybe I was curious in terms of this question, are you interested in hearing, your play out of different actors' voices, and does that inform your process? Is that part of it?
Yeah, I mean, for me, a large part of the initial writing of a piece is finding what the voices are for each of the characters. So a lot of the time I have an actor or a friend in mind that I'm kind of modeling those voices after. But that's not what it's ultimately going to sound like. That's just where I'm getting the speech pattern from. So hearing that and hearing new things every single time a new actor steps in is my favorite thing about writing plays, is just that discovery that happens over and over and over again as people find those new things that are specific to them and their interpretation. And really, that's what I love about theater in general, because in new works, we're constantly finding new things, but in older works, we're also finding new things in every production, which is why every production is so different. So I think it's a huge part of new works for me, but I think it's a huge part of any production.
So you think it's important then to go through the process of having several different casts and trying it out different ways?
Absolutely.
I mean, Billy, when you were attached to new plays in New York, did you tend to have people that attached from the beginning and took it all the way through? Was that always contingent? Did agents write that in, that this is going to be this actor, and then the playwright, the Maybe Stewart of the moment, would be stuck with that person? I mean, not stuck with it, but
No, it is true, and that's one of the things, especially if you're doing it in an organization that has union affiliations. And so if you have a director, it's hard to change course in the middle of that if you're connected to the one that's doing it in somewhere else. So it does create some of that. And sometimes it's just the economics of it. What you can do in a regional theater that is, say, associated with a university, where you could have all of what they call non-pros. You could have students who are in part of the production, where if it comes to a different theater, you can't do that. So it makes it an impossibility, so why go through that process? But I think there's always a solution. So those restrictions, those kind of things put on there with enough planning, you can get around them. You have to make your case to the unions, and oftentimes you will not win, but you'll come out of it knowing what it means.
And Daniela, do you like to direct brand new stuff, or like how does it feel to be direct? Like, did you actually watch? Because Playwrights Horizons version, I believe, is available. Did you watch it, and did that inform your choices, or did you want to come to it completely fresh and, being the second, probably not the second production, but
Well, no offense, but I purposely didn't watch it because I just wanted to come to it fresh. I saw some snippets and I saw the set design, but I just wanted to come to it fresh. Hearing everyone's great responses, I was thinking about, like, what do I prefer? I don't actually have a preference, and I've been lucky enough to work on quite a number of new works through the Bridge Initiative, and I love that process because you get to work often with the playwright, and it's very dynamic, and you can still make changes, and the actors can ask the playwright questions, and you're definitely like the midwife of just helping birth it, and then an already established produced play. I think what happens to me is I really actually fall in love with each play that I work on, like I really do, but then there's always a process of letting go when it's over. So I almost don't differentiate, because to go back to the question at the top of the hour, they're always new. Like they're always, every play seems to be new because it's new for me. So there's almost not even much of a difference. I love them all. I love them both.
A lot of times it is true, the difference in what role you're playing is the director is almost always taking the script as something that they're looking at, reading, and putting their vision along to it. So it is something that from that role is like you said, every play is new.
Well, and as you were saying, Daniela, like even with the two casts, like they're going to be the same in some ways, but they're going to be different. And so, I mean, I have to say, coming at it as an actor, like it took me a long time. There was one production in particular I can say of The Fantastics that I did, which was one of my favorite experiences in the theater. But I got it, and I found out that I got it because somebody else turned it down. And there's a piece of you as an actor that's like, well, I wasn't the first choice, and like, I don't know if they're really gonna like me, and am I good enough? And then, the truth is, like, that happens over and over and over again. I'm sure you can tell us, Billy, that like you're not gonna be the first choice. But then sometimes, like, I would think coming at it from the other side, you end up being like, well, that was a better choice. Like, I didn't see it in the audition, but man, I thought, like, I'm glad that's worked out this way. So, I at this point in my career have come to just be like accepting of the opportunities, and like the things that I'm going after myself are things that are like scary to me. And then I'm like, if I'm afraid of doing this, that's something I want to dig my teeth into, because I've got something to learn there. But yeah, for me, it's less about like whether it's new or somebody else has done it, or I was the second choice. It's at that point about like, what can I bring to the project? Sure. Been doing this for a little while, so I have a couple things I could say. Anybody else have any other questions? Thoughts?
I have one more.
Please. Bring it on.
Just because I'm curious, and it came to me like while you guys were responding, which I appreciate everybody pauses. I guess this would be more from a director's standpoint, but also a producer, I think. Have you ever had an issue with an actor where, kind of what you were saying, like you enjoy hearing how they do it in different ways and all that, but where you very much hear something one way and you want it presented that way, like you believe it's important to the telling of the story, and an actor not like vehemently refuses to do it that way, but just won't, and isn't necessarily defiant, but there's like a bit of defiance just because they won't do it. How do you handle that?
Okay, so the question is navigating actors who have one point of view, and maybe the producer or the director or the writer has a different one. No worries. I think that's the essence of your, yeah, okay. So thoughts, friends?
Okay, I'll admit it. I had to fire an actress who was 5 years old. And she was the daughter of the literary manager of the theater. Because it was this play, and she was supposed to run around, and it was a very scathing, like, social satire, and she was supposed to run around holding a syringe, and she would not hold the syringe. In rehearsal, she would hold the pencil. But it came time, she was like, okay, now you have to hold this, and she refused, and she cried. She was like, so I had to fire her. Yeah, well, it wasn't fun.
I'll say I have a friend who's a stage manager, and he was working on a new play, and I'm gonna forget the playwright's name. It was the one who always writes The Pillow Man. What's his name? The guy who wrote
Martin
The Pillow Man.
McDonough.
Yes, Martin McDonough. He writes really dark plays often. They're kind of like often pretty violent, but they're super funny, and he's super brilliant. But he was writing a play, and the way he writes is very specific. And he puts apparently, so some playwrights, I'm curious what your process with this is maybe, but some playwrights put commas where they want you to pause, like the punctuation is really dictating your rhythm. Others are much more open to interpretation. But this playwright, Martin McDonough, is apparently like, he wants you to observe the punctuation. He wants and not the, if he wrote . And so guess who they cast in this play? Christopher Walken. And so his way of saying his speech is not going to be what you expect. And so he was not observing the punctuation. And Martin McDonough apparently was like behind the table, but like, don't cast Christopher Walken if that's your playwright, right? Like this is, I mean, I guess, Christopher Walken did open the show because he's a huge star, but apparently Martin McDonough was just like livid and like tearing his hair out.
I think as well, just to answer that, not as a joke, is normally if you get to that point, both parties know, and that usually it's a relief from both sides to be like, you know what, we're not getting this. You're not happy, we're not happy, and it's almost unheard of from my experience that hasn't been. Yeah, feelings are hurt, and people invest a lot in it, but usually it happens and people know why. Do you agree?
That makes a lot of sense. I've actually never been in a situation like that where I could fire someone. I think the most intense it's gotten for me maybe was where I ended up having just a one-on-one conversation with the actor about their character. I am a therapist, so I do use therapy when it comes psychology when it comes to working with the actors, to really sort of go a little deeper to find out what is motivating them to have this block. And then I honestly just try to have a conversation with them to gently get them to see a different perspective. And I think, our art obviously is not a science, and as a director, I think everyone would agree that you have a vision in your mind, and you're not going to be able to hit that vision. It's not going to be 100%. You're going to have all these concessions you make, and you get as close as you possibly can. So sometimes you just say, well, this is as close as this actor is going to get to what I'm wanting, and I just have to let it go. I've never been in an extreme situation where I really had to sort of part ways with somebody, luckily, but then I am not at that level. So.
And sometimes it happens within the company itself. So it actually is something that, like maybe knows this, if it's more of a devised piece where it's an ensemble who's creating this together, and there has to be a certain level of trust amongst them. So I was doing the musical Once, and it was in its initial production at New York Theater Workshop, which was, again, the stage was slightly bigger than the Broadway stage, but it's 199 seats. Beautifully intimate thing. And there were two actors who were just not giving each other what they needed on stage because there was a lot of baggage coming on. And the director called me and said, okay, I spoke to one of the parties and told him one more step wrong and you're gone. And I was like, okay. And then what happened is those two actors had it out on the street in a way that made them both kind of realize, for whatever reason, that what they were bringing to the stage did not need to be there. And it did not need to be in the dressing room or anywhere near that theater, and they could take it out. And once they actually were able to communicate to each other that I can't do this performance if that's what I'm getting from you, and the other one's the same. And it was amazing, and that is all it took. And then the next day, it was fine, and it was fine. And then they moved to Broadway, and then it was fine for about another 6 weeks, and then it came back. And then so like it was one of those kind of things. And some of that in those instances, you have to weigh what it is that you're getting, and also the human cost and what's right, and who, like, there's no answer other than you have to really think it all through. And for my job was to protect the play and just to do what I needed to do to protect the play.
So was it ultimately your choice as the producer to fire people, or was that something that like the director would say, like, I can't work with them anymore, and the director would choose, or like who is the one who, or was it dependent on the situation?
It depends on the situation.
Yeah.
Normally, like if you're protecting the play, is can this play continue on with this going on off stage? And if it's creeping in, so you kind of need the director, but usually your person that you're getting the most valuable information from is your stage manager.
Yeah.
Stage manager, the other unsung heroes.
Oh, for sure. Do you have any thoughts on that, maybe?
Yeah, so kind of getting back to the original question too. In those situations, as a director and as a playwright, I like to look at them as new opportunities. So kind of going back to the hearing lots of different voices in a role. As a playwright, I might see it one way, and as the director, I might see it one way, but that doesn't speak for all of humanity and how all of humanity reads it. So when there's one of those kind of blockages between us, I always like to have a discussion with that actor and see where it's coming from, because at least in my experience, 9 times out of 10, it's coming from how they're interpreting the piece itself. And it might have something to do with something that's completely unrelated to the line, or how they connect to the line. And a lot of the time, they can change my mind about that line because they have a very specific interpretation that's causing them to say it that way. And this show in particular has been really interesting for me, because usually I actually have a page in almost every script I've written that's just a note on punctuation. And I use punctuation a little differently because of my background in slam poetry than most playwrights might. Sometimes it's a little bit more poetic and the syntax is a little bit strange. So I like to give some specific notes about when I use a dash, this is what I'm trying to say. When I use an open parentheses, this is what I'm trying to say. But from there, like once I have that element there and I know that the cast understands it, I let them take it and run, because I want it to sound like it's their voices. Most of my pieces are meant to be kind of a vulnerable exposure of the person who is inhabiting that role for a little while. So like with this one, it's been very person to person, and everybody has full freedom right now to kind of take their lines and run with them, even if that means changing some words, because they all know what they're trying to say, and they all know what the story is and what the intention of the story is. So if there's a better way for it to fit into their mouths or a better way for it to fit into their brains, I'm gonna lean that way, because I want it to be them on stage, not them playing someone else.
I want to be in your rehearsal room, maybe. Any other questions, thoughts? Yeah, Will?
Maybe how does that change when, like, I know that you're very aware of, like, trying to cast as diversely as possible, and I mean that in the most broad way, with disability, age, gender, across the spectrum, you try to cast inclusively. So if you're talking about a person with a disability, right, they may bring something to the room that doesn't allow them to do something, you may have to check. Like, so how do you balance those two?
Let me just reiterate the question so our audience at home can hear it. So we're talking about when you're casting, if you have an actor come in who has different abilities or different voice, frankly, from what Maybe is, how are you going to adjust to that?
Yeah.
Is that a good summary of that, Will?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. The first thing I always say in any rehearsal process, no matter what role I'm playing, is that my job is to advocate for the story and for the actors. And as a stage manager, I do that in one way. As a director, I do it in another. But my number one goal, especially in the beginning of rehearsal, as we're kind of figuring what those things are, learning those limitations, learning those boundaries that people have, I want to make sure that everybody feels safe approaching me with those things. So if that means we spend the first 2 or 3 or even the first week of rehearsals just getting to know each other and getting to feel comfortable being vulnerable with each other, and if that means sharing part of my story, because I'm also disabled and I fall into a lot of kind of oppressed groups, I want to make sure that everybody has the safety to come to me when they have a limitation that's not being respected. Because I want to know what those limitations are, because I think limitations are also opportunities sometimes. So just because someone might not physically be able to embody something the way I had envisioned it, doesn't mean they can't embody it. It means they have to embody it differently. And I think those kind of adjustments and adaptations and learning what those different elements are adds to the piece, because again, it brings in that humanity and it brings in that diversity that's part of life. And without it, we lose a lot because we're trying to present something that's not true to that person. And if it's not true, I don't think we can have that full sincerity when we present something.
Lovely. We're closing in on our hour, so we're gonna sort of close up, but with like parting thoughts, I suppose, unless anybody has any other questions. Nope.
I just want to say that speaking to the both of you, like I said before, I think it's a really lucky community to have artists like you working on this and working on this kind of work and being so honest and truthful in what you want to bring to it. So I salute you both and thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you
And
very
I also
much.
wanted,
Thank you.
before I forget, if anybody wants to come see these plays next week, we hope you do, we will give you a discount of $10 off your tickets. So use KERR, the name of the space we are in now, when you purchase your tickets, and because we would love for you to actually get to see what we've been talking about. So we'll credit you basically what you spent to be here tonight. So yeah, that's all I've got. Thank you so much, Billy, for moderating. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully we'll see you at the theater soon. Yay.
Thank you.
Yay.